Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service on behalf of a unique partnership with Alaska Public Media. It is Friday, September 30th, the last day of September 2022. We're going to jump right into things, a lot to talk about tonight. First of all, if you'd like additional weather information on top of what I provide, or if you're interested in checking out weather in other parts of the country, you can go to weather.gov. That's the National Weather Service's online presence. It'll bring you to the map of the continental U.S. with Alaska and Hawaii in the lower left. And you just point and click on that map and it'll bring up forecast and any relevant watches, warnings, or advisories for that location in the country. And most importantly, today we have Hurricane Ian that came on shore just northeast of Charleston along the South Carolina coast. It is currently working its way up into North Carolina. There are tropical storm warnings in effect there for areas of South Carolina and much of North Carolina, along with flash flood warnings due to heavy rainfall and even a tornado watch that'll continue until 10 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time for the coastal plain there of eastern North Carolina. Those folks there seeing the second landfall of Ian that happened earlier today, but fortunately that storm will continue lifting northward and eventually diminish to a tropical depression as we head into later tonight and during the day on Saturday. Still capable though of producing some heavier rains. But here in Alaska, hurricane force Bering Low is located out in the western Aleutians and the west-southwest quadrant there of the Bering Sea. It's going to track eastward but weaken. We currently have high wind warnings and hurricane force winds for the marine zones that'll continue at least up until early this evening. But the good news is those winds will eventually fall off and not be as strong once they get to the Alaska Peninsula and toward the southwest coast. I'll highlight more of that soon. There could be a minor storm surge of a foot or two above normal water levels there in Kuskokwim Bay. It's not a given, but the Anchorage Forecast Office will keep a close eye on that as we get into Sunday. Flood watches and advisories are in effect for the northern inner panhandle. We have a feet of moisture associated with a Gulf low that's going to produce 1 to 3 inches of rainfall now through tonight and in through at least Saturday morning. And I'll highlight more of those specific areas. And then snowfall will be possible now through the day Saturday with up to 4 more inches of snow expected in the eastern Brooks Range, especially in places like Adigan and Anatuvik passes. So here are where we have the flood watch and flood advisories. The flood watch encompasses the inner northern panhandle. There are flood advisories currently in effect for the Mendenhall Valley, including Jordan Creek and areas around Ott Lake. We also have a flood advisory for the Chilkat River and Porcupine Creek near Haines. More importantly, a flood warning for the Taya River near Skagway, where we expect the Taya River to crest well into moderate flood stage mid-Saturday morning around 18.5 feet. But the bulk of that rain will be pushing out of there by Saturday afternoon, becoming more scattered showers for Saturday afternoon and evening with some drier weather expected on Sunday. In the far north, the eastern Brooks Range, we do anticipate snowfall, and up to 4 inches could fall now through the day on Saturday, especially impacting areas like around Anatuvik and Adigan passes. And then looking at the satellite imagery, we can see the moisture feed coming up from the North Pacific into the eastern Gulf and then moving across into the northern panhandle. Off to the west, a well-defined curl in the clouds there, circulation. That is that powerful low. It's actually the remnants of a tropical system, Kalap, that came way up from down like toward in Indonesia, Philippines area. And that system is not as impactful, fortunately. It will not be nearly as impactful, and it's going to weaken as it works its way eastward. So nothing like the storm that struck a couple weeks ago up through Norton Sound, the lower Yukon Delta. Those areas will be spared any impacts from this storm. The area we're just kind of watching to be safe there is Kuskokwim Bay, may see water levels a foot or two higher following the passage of an occluded front as that low nears and weakens later Saturday and into Sunday. But again, we still see that moisture feed coming up out of the North Pacific into the northern portions of the Panhandle, and then that strong wrapped up low that's well west of St. Paul. We expect those hurricane force winds to come down to storm force across the central Aleutians, and then just gale force winds St. Matthew down through St. Paul, the Pribilof Islands. So that's good news. And here's the weather map this afternoon. The low had central pressure earlier today down into the 940s, around 945 millibars. It's come up this afternoon to nearly 960 millibars, and it works its way east. Later tonight, early Saturday morning, near 960 millibars, and then finally by Saturday, we anticipate it to be up to near about 970 millibars. The low that was in the Gulf lifts northeastward across the southern portion of the Yukon Territory, and the rains will be tapering off Saturday afternoon following a frontal passage there in the Panhandle. And then on Sunday, that strong Bering Sea low will weaken near Nunavik Island, and another one will kind of reform and redevelop there back toward the south central Aleutians. They are north of the central Aleutians for Sunday afternoon, and that could have some wind impacts, but it will not be as intense as the most recent western Aleutian storm. Low temperatures Saturday morning will be down in the 50s across the Panhandle. We're going to see some mid-upper 30s once you get into the south interior and near the Alaska Range, otherwise 40-ish for the Anchorage area. Temperatures Saturday afternoon, 50s, even a few 60-degree readings in the far southern Panhandle. Back to the west, still generally 40s to near 50 degrees at best. Sunday morning lows will stay above freezing across south central there in the interior. 40s across the Panhandle, so cooling down a bit there. Sunday afternoon, we're looking for high temperatures near 50, Anchorage, Kenai, Seward. 40s to the north. Otherwise, there could be some lower 60s occurring in the southern Panhandle at Craig and Metlakatla. And across the far north, readings Saturday morning will be below freezing. Arctic coast, Brooks Range, where we expect that snow in the eastern Brooks Range. Saturday afternoon, look for highs generally lower 40s across the Seward Peninsula on up through the Yukon Valley into the 40s, and then remaining below freezing along the Arctic coast. Sunday morning lows getting down in the 20s, colder temperatures up there in the higher elevations of the Brooks Range. Snow should be tapering off there by early Sunday. And morning lows still generally above freezing across the areas surrounding Norton Sound, with high temperatures Sunday afternoon, generally still above 40 as you get south of the Brooks Range and along the Yukon River. Across the interior southwest, lows upper 30s to near 40, otherwise in the 40s, mid-40s in through the Aleutians. Saturday afternoon, we're expecting highs generally in the 40s across the southwest interior, near or lower 50s out across the Alaska Peninsula along and just behind that occluded front. And then Sunday morning lows still above freezing across the southwest interior, mid-upper 30s, lower 40s along the coast, the southwest coast, and mid-40s there through the Aleutian chain. And then temperatures back up near 50 perhaps at Bethel, and generally lower 50s Dillingham down toward King Salmon and Chitnik. And then temperatures 6 to 10 day outlook, October 6th through 10th, above to much above normal across much of the state. And we are anticipating precipitation above normal, especially the interior along the Yukon River. So don't expect a lot of change in the pattern, and that may just delay the onset of any freeze-up.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Let's take a look now at your aviation weather if you have a flight planned either on Saturday or Sunday over the course of this weekend. Got a few different things going on. The main weather storm is a hurricane force low that's currently located in the southwest quadrant of the Bering that will continue to work its way eastward and then gradually weaken later this weekend as it moves into the areas toward Kuskokwim and Bristol Bays. But in the meantime, we do expect hurricane force winds along the western half of the western Aleutians on up into the lower Bering Sea. Out to the east, we have a plume of moisture creating heavier rainfall in the northern Panhandle this Friday afternoon into Saturday afternoon before diminishing. And then an area of winter weather. The eastern half of the Brooks Range could pick up another 2 to 4 inches of snow Friday through Saturday. So those are the three main things to contend with. Saturday afternoon, we expect IFR conditions along the Alcan border up there along the eastern Brooks Range and into the Arctic coast. We expect areas of IFR the intercoastal mountains of the north central Gulf, and then back out areas of the southwest interior and extending down into areas of the eastern Aleutians. On Sunday morning, IFR conditions are expected to be rather widespread up through the Yukon Valley, especially the central and upper Yukon Valley to the Alcan border. Also, IFR conditions are expected along the northern Gulf Coast back through the Kenai Peninsula, Cook Inlet, and then down through Kodiak Island, and also out over a fair amount of the central Bering Sea, including St. Paul and St. Matthew, as well as the far western Aleutians. Sunday afternoon, we expect the IFR conditions in the far north to become MVFR. As for areas south central, south of the Alaska Range, there could be some IFR conditions, especially the Susitna Valley down into northern half of Cook Inlet, Prince William Sound, east side of the Kenai, pockets there in the interior southwest and along the southwest coast, extending back through much of the Aleutian chain and Bering Sea. IFR conditions are expected Saturday at both Anaktuvuk as well as Adigan passes, where we expect there to be accumulating snowfall. Further south and west, Lake Clark and Merrill should generally be in IFR conditions throughout Saturday. And as we round up through the Alaska Range, Rainy Pass as well as Windy Pass are anticipating to hold on to IFR conditions. A little further east, Isabel Pass may be briefly MVFR early in the day, but becoming IFR. And Metasta Pass, far east end of the Alaska Range, IFR conditions are expected there throughout the day, as they are a little further south and west at Tanita Pass, IFR conditions on Saturday. And in Portage Pass, a bit of a split. The west side will see IFR conditions in the morning, giving way to VFR conditions, and then the east side should generally hold on to MVFR conditions throughout Saturday, so we made it a split there. And then across the far northern panhandle at Chilkoot and White, the heavier rainfall will be letting up as we get towards Saturday afternoon, and we expect IFR conditions to become VFR, especially latter half of the day. Freezing levels are lowest across the north part of the state. We do have some surface freezing temperatures there along the Brooks Range North Slope, at or below, and then aloft 2,000-foot freezing line is just along and north of the central Yukon Valley. And freezing levels do rise up to near and just above 4,000 feet out over the Gulf, out through the central Alaska Peninsula, and then they are highest along areas of the Panhandle, especially southern Panhandle could see some freezing levels as high as 10,000 feet Saturday morning. Greatest threat for icing will be with that intense low that's located out over the central lower Bering between 8,000 and a flight level of 18,000 feet. Interior could see some isolated moderate icing between 7 and 15,000 feet, and then along the Arctic coast 2,000 to 12,000 feet. Upper level jet stream winds, we have a core of strong winds in excess of 100 knots, 110 knots there from lower parts of the Panhandle on up into British Columbia, and then another area near and south of that low in the Bering, passing through the Aleutians upwards to 95 to near 100 knots, down to 700 millibars or 9,000 feet, a broad area of 65 knot winds there over northwest Canada, but out toward the Bering, the eastern and central Berings, we're seeing winds between 50 and 60 knots out of the northwest, just south of that low, and then a core of winds near 3,000 feet between the central Aleutians and just to the south of that low pressure center. That is where the greatest threat for moderate to isolated severe turbulence surfaced to 3,000.
Floating hundreds of miles from Earth, astronauts get a unique perspective of our planet. While they might recognize landmarks, space is the only place they can see the very edge of our planet's atmosphere.
From orbit, particularly looking at the horizon, did bring to mind how thin the atmosphere is. It's like an onion skin around this great big ball of the Earth.
This uppermost layer of Earth's atmosphere, the ionosphere, also overlaps with the very beginning of space. It's the job of NASA's new mission, GOLD, the global-scale observations of the Limit instrument, to study this region, a region that isn't just for astronauts to explore, but that affects humans every day down on the ground. For one thing, this layer of the upper atmosphere helps protect us from harmful radiation and energy emanating from the sun. But in our modern society, it does so much more. It affects the smartphone that sits in your pocket and the radio waves that guide our airplanes. The ionosphere is a crucial layer of the atmosphere through which our communications and GPS signals travel. And when this region changes, it impacts those communication signals. Changes can occur above this region from the sun's activity, also known as space weather. Changes can also occur below from Earth's weather, such as hurricanes and wind patterns. Gold connects the dots between how space weather and Earth's weather shape the upper reaches of the atmosphere. But this region isn't easy to study. The ionosphere spans roughly 60 to 400 miles from Earth's surface, which is too high for aircraft and scientific balloons, and the lower regions are too low to easily study with satellites. What are attainable, however, are the swaths of red and green light shining out from the upper atmosphere. Formed when the sun's rays hit atmospheric molecules, this light, named airglow, comes from green and red bands of glowing gas. Some of the airglow is invisible to our eyes, shining in infrared and ultraviolet light, which can only be seen with scientific instrumentation. Taking advantage of our planet's natural glow is gold. The gold instrument, which is about the size of a mini-fridge, is hitching a ride on a commercial communication satellite, SES-14. The satellite's orbit lies 22,000 miles above Earth, where it can record images in ultraviolet light to monitor changes in airglow across the globe. These images give information on the temperature, density, and composition of particles in the upper atmosphere. Gold collects these observations faster than any mission has ever done before. It captures an image of Earth's entire disk every 30 minutes, allowing scientists to see how the upper atmosphere evolves throughout the day. Gold joins a host of missions studying the very nature of space, around Earth, the Sun, and planets. As NASA ventures farther and farther from home, knowing the nature of space itself is crucial for our journey to understand our solar system and beyond.
There's a new class of chemical compounds impacting the Earth's ozone layer and raising concerns among some scientists. But a new NASA analysis indicates stratospheric ozone could actually be impacted more by climate change and the continued release of already banned chemicals. The Earth's ozone hole is showing signs of recovery, decades after the landmark agreement called the Montreal Protocol that banned many chemical compounds harmful to the ozone layer.
So we know the Montreal Protocol was a huge success. This was signed in the late 1980s when scientists and policymakers from around the world gathered together to try to save the ozone layer.
The chemicals they regulated persist in the atmosphere for many decades. They thin the ozone layer and they create a seasonal hole over Antarctica. They basically take away part of our planet's natural sunscreen, and that increases the risk of skin cancer and damage to plants.
Scientists have projected the ozone hole could disappear almost completely by about 2075, but several factors could delay that recovery.
There are some industrial compounds that are not banned by the Montreal Protocol, but as they enter the atmosphere, they will also hurt the ozone layer.
But the unregulated compounds have a short lifespan in the atmosphere, unlike the chlorofluorocarbons that were originally regulated. So they have a short-lived impact on ozone, and we don't think they'll delay recovery by more than a few years.
We projected by 2050, more than half of the ozone-depleting compounds in the atmosphere will come from long-lived substances banned by the protocol.
Because these compounds stay in the air for such a long time, compared to the unregulated, short-lived compounds, they will have a disproportionate and lingering impact on ozone. So any non-compliance with the protocol can have significant consequences.
And the really big uncertainty in ozone layer recovery is climate change. There are many naturally produced ozone-depleting substances that are emitted by the oceans. And as the oceans continue to warm due to climate change, those emissions will increase, and that will further delay ozone recovery.
Scientists want to better understand how climate change will affect ozone recovery.
This is a hard problem. As a scientific community, we need to work on this major issue. We now have a powerful new tool to simulate atmosphere and its interaction with land and ocean to study this issue. And that's what we're going to do.
how can you see the atmosphere? The answer is blowing in the wind. Tiny particles known as aerosols are carried by the air around the globe. This visualization uses data from NASA satellites combined with our knowledge of physics and meteorology to track 3 aerosols: dust, smoke, and sea salt. Sea salt, shown here in blue, is picked up by winds passing over the ocean. As tropical storms and hurricanes form, the salt particles are concentrated into the spiraling shape we all recognize. With their movements, we can follow the formation of Hurricane Irma and see the dust from the Sahara, shown in tan, get washed out of the storm center by the rain. Advances in computing speed allow scientists to include more details of these physical processes in their simulations of how the aerosols interact with the storm systems. The increased resolution of the computer simulation is apparent in fine details like the hurricane bands spiraling counterclockwise. Computer simulations let us see how different processes fit together and evolve as a system. By using mathematical models to represent nature, we can separate the system into component parts and better understand the underlying physics of each. Today's research improves next year's weather forecasting ability. Hurricane Ophelia was very unusual. It headed northeast, pulling in Saharan dust and smoke from wildfires in Portugal, carrying both to Ireland and the UK. This aerosol interaction was very different from other storms of the season. As computing speed continues to increase, scientists will be able to bring more scientific details into the simulations, giving us a deeper understanding of our home planet.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back, and let's look at the sea ice edge quickly. We're having a little bit of ice beginning to develop there along the northwest coast of the Chukchi Sea, as well as along the Arctic coast, the Beaufort Sea, near Prudhoe Bay, and near and just north of Point Ley. And we expect that trend to continue as temperatures continue to get a bit colder there in the far north. Otherwise, across the southeast panhandle, winds will be for the inner channels out of the southeast, 30 to 35 knot gales with gusts upwards of 45 knots possible there around Petersburg. Waves generally 7 to 8 feet the inner channels. Outer channels look for west-southwest winds 25 to 30 knots, as high as 35 knot gales just south of Craig. Waves generally 12 to 16 feet. On Sunday, winds will come down and shift there across the inner channels. North winds 10 to 15 knots. Petersburg down toward Ketchikan, waves 2 to 3 feet, but still southerly winds 15 knots, waves 3 feet in Lynn Canal. And same split happenings, north winds 15 knots south of Sitka, waves 7 to 8 feet, but southerly winds to 20 knots with 10-foot waves, especially west of Sitka up through off of Yakutat. And across the northwestern Gulf, off the Kenai, winds will be westerly to 30 knots with waves around 8 feet, as high as 10 feet there. South of Cordova, Prince William Sound, west winds 25 knots, waves 6 feet. And for Cook Inlet, winds will be out of the south-southwest, 15 knots, waves generally 3 to 4 feet. For Sunday, winds come down further. Southeast winds to 20 knots there off the Kenai, 7-foot waves. Prince William Sound, southeast wind to 15 knots, waves a few feet. Mixed bag of wind directions there through Cook Inlet, around 15 knots and waves 3 to 4 feet mid and upper Cook Inlet, and perhaps 5 feet there at the entrance. On Saturday, across Kodiak Island, winds will be down on the Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula. Southwest winds to 25 knots, waves 7 to 10 feet. There will be a core of stronger winds well west of this area, north of the eastern and central Aleutians. However, that core of winds will weaken as it comes east by Sunday. Southwest winds at 25 knots, waves 16 feet there north of Cold Bay. And by Sunday, That wind core will continue to weaken along with the low that'll be located near just south of Nunavik Island on Sunday afternoon. So we expect winds across the region to be south to southwest, 20-25 knots up toward Kodiak Island, and as high as 30 knots south of Saint Point and north of Cold Bay. Waves highest there north of Cold Bay, upwards to 15 to 18 feet. Saturday, we do have a core of strong winds passing north of the central and eastern Aleutians. Nevertheless, we expect 35 to 40 knot gales along the Aleutian chain, especially Nikolsky westward. Waves running in excess of 20 feet on the Bering side and 13 to 18 feet on the North Pacific side. That core of winds will weaken as it works its way east on Sunday, and we still expect, though, winds to be in the 35 to 40 knot gales, much of the Aleutian chain. Waves running 12 to 15 feet on the North Pacific side, and generally 15, though as high as 20 feet there just to the north of Dutch Harbor in the open waters of the Bering. And then across the southwest coast up to Norton Sound, easterly winds offshore flow. That's good news for Norton Sound, the lower Yukon Delta. Waves 4 feet there within Norton Sound. Strongest winds near the low center, passing between there, St. Paul, St. George. Look for easterly winds 30 knots, waves upwards to 22 feet around St. Matthew, 23 feet there, St. Paul and St. George. And then Sunday the winds will come down with the low center near just south of Nunavik Island. And we expect winds to still be out of the east, out of Norton Sound there, 20 knots, and off of the lower Yukon Delta, 20 to 25 knots. Waves in the open waters of the eastern Bering, 9 to about 11 feet. And across the northern Arctic coast, north-northeast winds 15 knots, waves a few feet. East-northeast winds 20 knots through the Chukchi Sea and the northwest coast with waves of 5 to 7 feet. And then off of the western Seward Peninsula, 30 knot winds out of the east with waves as high as 16 feet on the north side of St. Lawrence Island. And for Sunday, look for generally northeast to east winds along the Arctic coast, 15 knots, waves a few feet. They'll pick up to 20 to 25 knots through the lower Chukchi Sea, Wainwright southward through the Bering Strait, with waves generally running 4 to 7 feet there across the Chukchi Sea, and as much as 9 feet south of the Bering Strait to the north side of St. Lawrence Island. So that's all the time I have for tonight's show. Thank you for watching, and be sure to rejoin me Saturday evening.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.